The autumn evening was cool but pleasant as Jasmine Turner gathered her papers at the teacher's lounge table. The elementary school hallways were quiet now, a stark contrast to the cheerful chaos of the day. Parent-teacher conferences had run longer than expected, and Jasmine glanced at her watch. Almost 8:30 p.m. "You heading out, Jasmine?" asked Principal Chen, switching off the lights in her office. "Yes, finally," Jasmine replied with a tired smile. "Third-grade parents have a lot of questions this year. That's because they all adore you. Drive safe, okay?" Jasmine nodded, shouldering her worn leather bag filled with student artwork and essays she'd promised to review over the weekend. At 28, she was already in her 6th year of teaching, having known since childhood that education was her calling. Her classroom was known throughout Westridge Elementary for its vibrant atmosphere and the remarkable progress her students made, particularly those who struggled elsewhere. The parking lot was nearly empty as Jasmine climbed into her blue Honda Civic, a car she'd purchased secondhand 3 years ago, when she'd finally paid off her student loans. The radio came to life with soft jazz as she pulled onto Maple Street, the main road that would take her through town and eventually to the small apartment she shared with her cat, Fitzgerald. 2 miles from school, blue and red lights flashed in her rearview mirror. Jasmine checked her speedometer. She was going exactly the speed limit. Perhaps a taillight was out. She signaled and pulled to the curb, following the procedure her father had taught her years ago. Turn off the engine. Place hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel, remain calm. The officer approached slowly, flashlight beams sweeping across her back seat where student artwork was visible. Jasmine rolled down her window. "License and registration," the officer said without introduction. His nameplate read Officer Dawson. "Of course," Jasmine replied politely, keeping her movements slow and deliberate as she reached for her glove compartment. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" Officer Dawson didn't respond, instead speaking into his radio. "Got a blue Honda Civic, license plate matching the APB." He studied her license. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Confusion swept over Jasmine. "Excuse me. Is there a problem with my—" "I said step out of the vehicle. Now." His tone hardened. Jasmine's heart began to race, but she complied, unbuckling her seatbelt and slowly opening her door. "Officer, I'm a teacher at Westridge Elementary. I'm just heading home from parent-teacher conferences." A second patrol car pulled up, lights flashing. Officer Dawson grabbed Jasmine's arm roughly and spun her around to face her car, hands on the hood. His voice was cold. "Please. There must be some mistake," Jasmine said, her voice trembling slightly as she placed her palms on the warm metal of her car. "I haven't done anything wrong. We've got reports of a blue Honda Civic involved in a pharmacy robbery 20 minutes ago," said a second officer who approached from the new patrol car. His nameplate read Officer Reynolds. The suspect fled with prescription medications. "That's impossible," Jasmine said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've been at Westridge Elementary School since 7 this morning. I just left after parent-teacher conferences. You can call Principal Chen, please, just check—" "Quiet," Officer Dawson snapped. "Spread your legs." A few cars slowed as they passed. Jasmine felt a flush of humiliation as the officers began to search her. They found her school ID badge clipped to her bag. "This could be fake," Officer Reynolds said dismissively. "It's not fake," Jasmine replied, her professional composure beginning to crack. "I teach 3rd grade. Room 114, please just call the school." Officer Dawson yanked her arms behind her back and cuffed her wrists tightly. The cold metal bit into her skin. "You're making a huge mistake," Jasmine said, her voice rising. "I'm not who you're looking for." More cars were stopping now. Across the street, someone had come out of the convenience store and was watching. Jasmine recognized him as the parent of a former student. The shame intensified as she saw him raise his phone, likely recording. "We've got a loud one," Officer Reynolds said with a smirk. "They always say they didn't do it. I was teaching children all day." Jasmine's voice cracked. "My student's artwork is right there in the back seat." Officer Dawson yanked open her back door and roughly pulled out a stack of colorful papers. "Could be a cover." He dropped the children's artwork onto the damp ground where it scattered in the light evening breeze. "Stop," Jasmine cried out. "Those are my students' projects." "Shut up," Dawson growled, moving uncomfortably close to her face. He lowered his voice. "You people always think you can talk your way out of everything." The phrase "you people" hung in the air between them. Jasmine felt a cold realization wash over her. This wasn't just a mistake. A small crowd had gathered now, illuminated by the flashing police lights. More phones were out recording. Jasmine could hear murmurs from the onlookers. "That's Miss Turner from Westridge. What are they doing to her? She teaches my nephew." Officer Reynolds was going through her bag now, dumping its contents onto the hood of her car. Lesson plans. Her wallet, a half-eaten granola bar, grading pens, a novel she was reading to her class. "No drugs here," he called to Dawson. "Check the trunk," Dawson ordered,
keeping his hand firmly on Jasmine's shoulder.
pressing her against the car. "Officer? Please." Jasmine tried again, fighting to keep her voice from shaking. "Call the school. Call my principal. I've been teaching all day. I couldn't have robbed a pharmacy." A third police car arrived. An older officer stepped out and approached the scene, taking in the growing crowd of onlookers with a frown. "What do we have here?" he asked. "Pharmacy robbery suspect," Officer Dawson replied. Blue Honda Civic matching the description. The senior officer looked at Jasmine, then at the school papers and teaching materials scattered around. "Did you run her ID?" "Says she's a teacher," Reynolds replied with a shrug. Could be lying. The senior officer, whose nameplate read Sergeant Powell, picked up Jasmine's school ID from where it had fallen. He studied it, then looked at Jasmine more carefully. "Ma'am, where do you work?" he asked, his tone noticeably more professional than the other officers. "Westridge Elementary," Jasmine replied, relief flooding through her at finally being addressed like a human being. "I was there all day for classes and then parent-teacher conferences this evening. Please call Principal Chen. She saw me leave just 20 minutes ago." Sergeant Powell nodded and stepped away to make a call. Jasmine could feel Officer Dawson's grip tighten on her shoulder. "Don't get comfortable," he muttered. "Sergeant's too soft." The minutes that followed were among the longest of Jasmine's life. Standing handcuffed against her car, her students' artwork blowing down the street, strangers filming her humiliation, Jasmine fought back tears. She thought of her father's warnings about how to behave if ever stopped by police, advice she'd always hoped she'd never need. Finally, Sergeant Powell returned. "Uncuff her," he ordered. "But Sarge," Dawson began. "I said uncuff her now." Powell's voice left no room for argument. "I just spoke with Principal Chen at Westridge. She confirmed Ms. Turner was at school until approximately 8:30 p.m. The pharmacy robbery happened at 8:15 across town. It's physically impossible for her to have been involved." The handcuffs were removed, but the relief Jasmine felt was overshadowed by rage and humiliation. She rubbed her wrists where the cuffs had left angry red marks. "Ms. Turner, I apologize for this misunderstanding," Sergeant Powell said, his tone formal but sincere. "There was another blue Honda Civic involved in an incident tonight." "This wasn't a misunderstanding," Jasmine said, her voice quiet but firm. "Your officers didn't even check my alibi before handcuffing me and treating me like a criminal. They threw my students' work on the ground. They made assumptions about me based on—" She didn't finish the sentence, but everyone present knew what she meant. Sergeant Powell looked uncomfortable. "We'll be conducting a full review of this stop. You're free to go, Ms. Turner." Jasmine looked around at the mess of her belongings, at the small crowd still watching, at Officer Dawson's barely concealed contempt. Something shifted inside her in that moment, a realization that what had happened to her was happening to others who might not have a Sergeant Powell arrive in time, who might not have witnesses with phones, who might not have a principal to vouch for them. "I want your badge numbers," she said, straightening her shoulders. "All of you. And I want a formal complaint form." "Come on, lady," Officer Reynolds scoffed. "We made a mistake. No harm done." "No harm?" Jasmine repeated, looking him directly in the eye. "Do you have any idea what you've done here tonight?" As she gathered her scattered belongings, helped by a few kind bystanders, Jasmine's mind was already working. This wouldn't end here on this street corner. What had happened to her tonight was part of something larger, something systemic, something that needed to change. What she didn't know yet was that among the witnesses, a local journalist had recognized her. By morning, the cell phone videos would begin circulating online. By afternoon, they would go viral. And by the next evening, Jasmine Turner, third-grade teacher, wrongfully detained and humiliated, would find herself at the beginning of a journey that would transform not just her life, but the lives of countless others. But for now, hands still trembling, she simply got back into her car, turned the key and drove toward home, dignity intact despite everything they had tried to take from her. Jasmine didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the cold metal of handcuffs biting into her wrists and saw the faces of strangers watching her humiliation. Around 4 in the morning, she gave up trying and sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea that grew cold as she stared out the window. By dawn, her phone was buzzing constantly. The first call came from Principal Chen. "Jasmine, there's a video online," Chen said, her voice tight with concern, "of what happened to you last night. A parent sent it to me. Are you okay?" "I'm not sure," Jasmine answered honestly. Her wrists were bruised, but the deeper wounds weren't visible. "Take the day off," Principal Chen insisted. "I'll cover your class." "No," Jasmine said firmly. "My students need consistency. I need normality. I'll be there." When she arrived at Westridge Elementary, whispers followed her down the hallway. Colleagues gave her concerned looks but seemed unsure what to say. In her classroom, Jasmine took a deep breath and wrote the morning assignment on the board, her hand trembling slightly. 8-year-old Zoe approached her desk before the bell rang. "Miss Turner, my mom showed me a video. Were those police officers being mean to you?" Jasmine knelt to meet Zoe's eyes. "Something happened that wasn't fair, but I'm okay. And today we're learning about adjectives, remember?" The morning passed in a blur of lessons and routines, a welcome distraction from the storm brewing outside the classroom walls. During lunch, Jasmine checked her phone and felt her stomach drop. The video had thousands of shares. Local news websites had picked up the story. Elementary teacher wrongfully detained. Racial profiling allegations surface. More disturbing were the comments beneath the articles. While many expressed outrage at her treatment, others defended the officers or questioned what she must have done to provoke the stop. Some comments were openly racist, suggesting she fit a profile regardless of her profession. By afternoon, a local reporter was waiting in the school parking lot. "Ms. Turner, would you care to comment on the incident? Do you plan to file a lawsuit? Will you be speaking with the police chief?" Jasmine hurried to her car without answering, heart pounding. When she reached her apartment, 2 more reporters were waiting. She slipped in through the back entrance, locked her door, and sank to the floor, overwhelmed. Her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Ms. Turner? This is Antonio Washington from the Community Justice Center. I'm a civil rights attorney. I've seen the videos of what happened to you, and I'd like to offer my services pro bono if you're considering legal action." Jasmine closed her eyes. "I haven't decided what I'm doing yet." "I understand," Antonio replied. "But please know you have options. What happened to you was textbook racial profiling and excessive force. We've documented dozens of similar cases in our district over the past 3 years." After taking his contact information, Jasmine hung up and checked her email. 57 new messages. Former students, parents, strangers expressing support, journalists seeking comments, and, most surprisingly, 3 messages from other people sharing their own stories of being wrongfully stopped by police. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Lucia Gonzalez. "Ms. Turner, you don't know me, but my brother went through something similar last year. No one believed him because there wasn't a video. He lost his job because he missed work after being held for 48 hours. Your story is giving people like us hope that maybe someone will finally listen. Please don't back down." As evening fell, Jasmine's phone rang again. This time it was her father. "Baby girl, are you okay? Your mother and I just saw the news." Jasmine's composure finally broke. "Dad, it was horrible. Just like you always warned me about. I did everything right. Kept my hands visible, spoke respectfully. Didn't argue, and they still treated me like a criminal. I'm coming over," he said immediately. An hour later, Jasmine sat on her couch between her parents. Her father, a retired postal worker who had experienced his share of racial profiling over the years, held her hand tightly. Her mother, who taught at a high school across town, had brought containers of homemade food that now sat untouched on the kitchen counter. "The police department issued a statement," her father said, showing her his phone. "They're claiming it was a regrettable misunderstanding, but that the officers followed protocol given the information they had." "That's not true," Jasmine said, anger rising in her voice. "They never even checked my alibi until the sergeant arrived. They threw my students' artwork on the ground. One of them said, 'You people,' to me." Her mother squeezed her shoulder. "What do you want to do, honey?" Jasmine looked at the email from Lucia Gonzalez on her screen. "I don't know yet. Part of me wants to hide until this all blows over, But another part. Her phone buzzed with a text from Principal Chen. "Jasmine, the school board is receiving calls about your situation. They're supportive but concerned about media attention. Can we talk in the morning?" Jasmine felt a knot forming in her stomach. Would her job be affected? The thought of losing the classroom she loved made her feel physically ill. "You should get some rest," her mother suggested, seeing the exhaustion on her face. "Things will be clearer after you sleep." But sleep didn't come easily that night either. Jasmine tossed and turned, playing the incident over and over in her mind, thinking of what she could have said or done differently, even though rationally she knew she had done nothing wrong. Her alarm went off at 6 a.m. She had barely slept 2 hours. As she made coffee, her phone pinged with a news alert. Police officers involved in Turner incident had previous complaints. The article detailed how Officer Dawson, the one who had handcuffed her, had 3 prior excessive force complaints, all filed by people of color. All had been dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Officer Reynolds had been transferred from another precinct following a departmental review, the details of which were not public. Jasmine's hands shook as she got ready for work. In the bathroom mirror, she hardly recognized herself. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she looked smaller somehow, diminished. At school, Principal Chen called her into the office before classes began. "The superintendent wants to issue a statement supporting you," Chen explained, "but they need to know if you're planning to speak publicly or take legal action. They're worried about complications." "Complications," Jasmine repeated flatly. "You mean they're worried I'll make the district look bad if I don't just quietly accept what happened?" Principal Chen's expression softened. "That's not what I meant. We're on your side, Jasmine. But this situation has become bigger than just one incident. There are politics involved now." Before Jasmine could respond, her phone buzzed. It was Antonio Washington again. "Ms. Turner, I hate to pressure you, but the police department is controlling the narrative. They've released the officer's body camera footage, but only from after the sergeant arrived. It makes it look like they were professional throughout. We need to counter this quickly." After school, Jasmine found more reporters waiting. This time, a mother of one of her students approached them angrily. "Leave her alone. She's a teacher, not a celebrity. My daughter needs her math lesson, not her teacher being harassed." Touched by the support but overwhelmed by the attention, Jasmine slipped away and drove to a coffee shop in a different neighborhood where she wouldn't be recognized. She needed to think. As she sat in a corner booth, her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Turner, this is Sergeant Powell. I'd like to speak with you privately if you're willing. What happened was wrong. I filed a formal report about the conduct of both officers." Jasmine stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Could she trust him? Was this a trap? Before she could decide, the bell on the coffee shop door jingled. A woman about her age walked in, ordered, then hesitated before approaching Jasmine's table. "Excuse me, are you Jasmine Turner?" she asked quietly. Jasmine tensed. "Yes, I'm Lucia Gonzalez. I emailed you." The woman's eyes were kind but carried a familiar weariness. "I hope you don't mind that I found you. My brother saw you come in here." "Please sit down," Jasmine offered, relieved it wasn't another reporter. Lucia sat and placed a folder on the table. "These are complaints filed against Officers Dawson and Reynolds over the past 5 years. Public records, but buried deep. My brother and I have been tracking police misconduct since his incident." Jasmine opened the folder, page after page of similar stories. Different people, different circumstances, but the same officers, the same patterns, the same dismissals of complaints. "There are dozens of us," Lucia said quietly, "but no one would listen because we didn't have proof. Now, because of your video, people are paying attention." Something shifted in Jasmine at that moment. The fear and humiliation that had consumed her for the past 2 days began to transform into something else, a sense of purpose, of responsibility. "What happened to your brother?" she asked. As Lucia told her story, Jasmine realized that her incident wasn't isolated. It was part of a pattern that had been hurting her community for years. People had been crying out for help, for justice, but their voices had been ignored or silenced. Maybe hers wouldn't be. That evening, Jasmine made 3 phone calls. The first was to Antonio Washington, accepting his offer of legal representation. The second was to a journalist whose reporting on community issues she had always respected. And the third was to Principal Chen. "I need to take a few personal days," she told her principal. There's something important I have to do. When she hung up, Jasmine opened her laptop and began to write. Not a complaint or a lawsuit, though those would come later. Instead, she wrote her story, every detail, every emotion, every injustice. And beside it, she placed Lucia's brother's story and the stories from the emails she'd received. By midnight, she had created a simple website, Voices Unheard, a place where these stories could live together, where patterns could be seen, where individual incidents could be understood as part of a larger system. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Jasmine felt something she hadn't felt since the moment those police lights had flashed in her rearview mirror. Hope. Jasmine woke to the sound of her phone ringing. Sunlight streamed through her blinds as she fumbled for it, still groggy from her first decent night's sleep in days. "Hello?" she answered, her voice thick with sleep. "Ms. Turner, this is Diane Winters from Channel 8 News. Your website has gone viral overnight. We'd like to have you on our morning show to discuss." Jasmine sat up, suddenly wide awake. My website viral? After hanging up, she opened her laptop. The simple page she'd created the night before, Voices Unheard, had received over 20,000 views. The comment section was flooded with messages, many sharing similar experiences. Her email inbox had hundreds of new messages. More surprising was a notification from the journalist she'd contacted. He had already written an article titled, "Teachers' Wrongful Detention Reveals Pattern of Police Misconduct," for the city's most respected newspaper. It was scheduled to run on the front page tomorrow. Jasmine's hands trembled as she scrolled through the responses. What had started as a personal quest for justice was quickly becoming something much larger. It both thrilled and terrified her. Her phone rang again. This time it was Antonio Washington, her attorney. "Have you seen the news?" he asked without preamble. "The police chief is holding a press conference at noon. I think they're feeling the pressure from your website and the videos. We need to be prepared for their response." Jasmine took a deep breath. "What should I do?" "For now, don't give any interviews," Antonio advised. "Let's watch the press conference first, then we'll craft our response. And Jasmine, you should know that Officer Dawson is claiming you were aggressive and uncooperative. Their union representative is already pushing back." A cold feeling settled in Jasmine's stomach. Of course they would try to paint her as the problem. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'll watch the press conference." At noon, Jasmine sat in Antonio's office watching the police chief on a large screen. Chief Bennett, a gray-haired man with a permanently stern expression, stood behind a podium flanked by American flags. "The Westridge Police Department takes all allegations of misconduct seriously," he began, his voice steady and practiced. "We have reviewed the incident involving Ms. Turner and have determined that while the officers followed proper procedure given the information they had at the time, certain aspects of the interaction could have been handled with greater sensitivity." Antonio scoffed. Translation: "We're not admitting any wrongdoing." Chief Bennett continued. "Officer Dawson and Officer Reynolds have been placed on administrative duty pending a full review. We are implementing additional training for all officers on community relations and implicit bias awareness." "Administrative duty," Antonio muttered. "Not even administrative leave. They're still getting paid and working desk jobs." As the press conference ended, a reporter shouted a final question. "Chief Bennett, have you seen the other complaints against these officers documented on the Voices Unheard website?" The chief's expression tightened. "We're aware of the website. I would caution the public against believing unverified accusations posted anonymously online. The proper channel for complaints is through our Internal Affairs Division." The screen went dark. Antonio turned to Jasmine. "They're scared. Your website has hit a nerve. People are finally seeing the pattern that the department has been hiding for years." Jasmine nodded slowly, processing everything. "So what now?" "Now," Antonio said, leaning forward, "we file a formal complaint with specific demands, disciplinary action against the officers, policy changes for traffic stops, and an independent review of all complaints against these officers, and we go public with it." Later that afternoon, Jasmine sat in a different office, this one belonging to Lucia Gonzalez's brother Miguel. Unlike Jasmine's viral moment, Miguel's wrongful arrest had happened without cameras, without witnesses willing to speak up. He had spent 2 nights in jail before being released without charges, and had lost his job as a result. "I never thought anyone would care about what happened to me," Miguel said, his voice quiet but intense. "When I filed a complaint, they said there was no evidence. It was my word against the officers. Guess whose word counted more? Around them, a small group had gathered. 6 people who had responded to the website and lived nearby. Each had a story similar to Jasmine's and Miguel's. Each had filed complaints that went nowhere. Each had felt alone until now. The website is just the beginning, Jasmine told them. We need to organize, to show that these aren't isolated incidents but a pattern that demands action. A woman named Tina, a nurse who had been wrongfully detained while driving home from a night shift, raised her hand. I'm willing to speak publicly now. I was too scared before, worried about my job, my reputation. But seeing you come forward, Jasmine, it gives me courage. One by one, others nodded in agreement. By the end of the meeting, they had formed the Justice Now Coalition and planned their first public event. A community forum where people could share their experiences directly with city council members who had agreed to attend. As Jasmine drove home, she felt a mix of emotions. Fear still lingered. Fear of retaliation, of public scrutiny, of failing those who were now looking to her for leadership. But beneath that fear was a growing sense of purpose. She had stumbled into this role, but it felt increasingly right. Her phone rang through her car speakers. It was Principal Chen. Jasmine, the superintendent wants to meet with you tomorrow. Jasmine's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Am I in trouble? There was a pause. Not exactly. But there's concern about the publicity and how it might affect the school. Some parents have called worried that your situation might disrupt their children's education. Their situation, Jasmine repeated, a note of anger creeping into her voice. You mean their racial profiling? Their police misconduct? I'm on your side, Principal Chen said quickly. But I need to warn you. The superintendent might suggest you take a leave of absence until things quiet down. Jasmine pulled over, suddenly needing to stop driving. They want me to disappear, to stop making noise. I'll support whatever you decide, Principal Chen assured her. But yes, some board members think it would be better for everyone if you stepped back temporarily. After hanging up, Jasmine sat in her parked car, tears of frustration threatening to spill. Everything she had worked for, her teaching career, her relationship with her students, was now at risk because she had dared to speak up about an injustice. For a moment, she considered giving in. Taking the leave of absence, letting her attorney handle the complaint while she retreated from the public eye. It would certainly be easier. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Lucia. Just got word that 3 more officers have had complaints filed against them on the website. People are finally speaking up. This is working, Jasmine. Attached was a screenshot of a social media post from a local community leader. The Voices Unheard website shows what we've been saying for years. This isn't about bad apples. It's about a system that protects its own at the expense of our community. Justice now. Jasmine took a deep breath and started her car again. The decision was made. She wouldn't back down, even if it meant risking her job. Some things were more important. The next morning, she sat across from Superintendent Hayes, a man known for prioritizing the district's public image above all else. Principal Chen sat beside her, a silent but reassuring presence. Ms. Turner, the superintendent began, while we sympathize with your situation, we feel it would be in the best interest of the students if you took a paid leave of absence until this matter is resolved. Jasmine met his gaze steadily. With all due respect, sir, what lesson would that teach my students? That when faced with injustice, they should be quiet and disappear. This isn't about— It is, Jasmine interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. My students are watching how I respond to this situation. Many of them come from communities that have experienced exactly what happened to me. What message does it send if their teacher, who always tells them to stand up for what's right, simply vanishes when she tries to do the same? Principal Chen spoke up. Perhaps there's a compromise. Jasmine is an excellent teacher. Removing her from the classroom punishes the students and sends the wrong message. The superintendent frowned, clearly not used to being challenged. The distraction can be minimized, Jasmine said. I won't give interviews during school hours. I won't discuss the case with students, but I won't hide either. After a tense silence, the superintendent nodded reluctantly. 2 weeks. We'll reevaluate in 2 weeks. And Ms. Turner, not a word about this to the press. The district's position is strictly neutral. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a defeat either. Jasmine would keep her classroom, at least for now. That evening, as Jasmine prepared for the community forum, she received an unexpected visitor. Sergeant Powell, the officer who had ordered her release on the night of her detention, stood at her door. "Miss Turner," he said, removing his hat. "I hope I'm not intruding. I'm off duty." Jasmine hesitated before inviting him in. "What can I do for you, Sergeant?" Powell sat stiffly on her couch, clearly uncomfortable. "I've seen your website. I've read the complaints. And I want you to know you're right. What happened to you wasn't an isolated incident." Jasmine waited, sensing there was more. "I've been on the force for 22 years, Powell continued. "I've seen the culture change, and not for the better. Officers like Dawson and Reynolds, they're protected by the system even when they're clearly in the wrong. Why are you telling me this?" Jasmine asked. Powell met her eyes. "Because I'm willing to testify. About what I've witnessed. About the complaints that get buried. About the officers who face no consequences. It might end my career, but I can't stay silent anymore." As he left, Jasmine felt a shift in the air, a sense that something significant had just happened. The movement she had accidentally started was growing beyond what she could have imagined. People from all sides, even from within the system itself, were finding the courage to speak up. Tomorrow would be the community forum. Voices that had long been silenced would finally be heard, and Jasmine, who had only wanted justice for herself a week ago, now carried the weight of all those voices. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. It was exactly what needed to be done. The community center was packed beyond capacity. People stood along the walls, sat on the floor in the aisles, and spilled out into the hallway. Jasmine had expected maybe 50 attendees at their forum. Over 300 had shown up. "We need to start," Antonio whispered, nodding toward the row of city council members shifting uncomfortably at the front table. 4 of the 9 members had agreed to attend, more than Jasmine had hoped for, but still not a majority. Jasmine nodded and approached the microphone. The room gradually quieted as she adjusted it to her height. 3 weeks ago, she had been an elementary school teacher whose biggest public speaking experience was parent-teacher night. Now she faced a room full of community members, activists, reporters, and officials. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "My name is Jasmine Turner. 3 weeks ago, I was wrongfully detained by police officers while driving home from work. What happened to me was not unique or unusual. It was part of a pattern that has affected many in our community for years." She gestured to the people seated beside her. Miguel, Lucia, Tina, and others who had agreed to share their stories. "Tonight, we're not here to attack the police department or individual officers. We're here to speak truth about our experiences and to propose concrete solutions that will make our community safer for everyone, including the officers who serve it." For the next 2 hours, people stepped up to the microphone. Some shared stories of being wrongfully stopped, questioned, or detained. Others spoke of family members who had suffered similar experiences. A retired police officer talked about the culture within the department that rewarded aggressive tactics and discouraged reporting misconduct. Throughout it all, Jasmine watched the city council members. 2 seemed genuinely moved, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. 1 looked bored and checked his watch repeatedly. The 4th, Councilwoman Diaz, listened with increasing intensity, her expression growing more troubled with each testimony. When the last speaker finished, Jasmine returned to the microphone. "We've prepared a list of specific policy changes that would address many of the issues raised tonight." She handed copies to the council members and distributed them throughout the audience. The list included mandatory body cameras with penalties for deactivation, a civilian oversight board with real enforcement power, implicit bias training, and revised protocols for traffic stops. "None of these proposals are radical," Jasmine explained. "Many have been implemented successfully in other cities. All of them are designed to protect both citizens and officers by creating greater transparency and accountability." Councilwoman Diaz raised her hand. "Ms. Turner, this is powerful testimony. I believe I speak for at least some of my colleagues when I say we've heard you. But I have to ask, what do you say to those who worry these changes would make policing more difficult or dangerous?" It was the question Jasmine had been expecting, the one always raised to resist change. Fortunately, they had prepared for it. "I'd like to introduce someone who can address that concern directly," Jasmine said. "Sergeant Thomas Powell has served in our police department for over 20 years. A murmur ran through the crowd as Powell walked to the microphone. He was in civilian clothes but stood with the unmistakable posture of a career officer. "I've spent my entire adult life in law enforcement," Powell began. "I believe in the oath I took to protect and serve. That's why I'm here tonight." He paused, visibly gathering his courage. Nothing proposed here tonight would make officers' jobs harder or more dangerous. In fact, the opposite is true. Clear guidelines protect good officers. Accountability weeds out those who shouldn't wear the badge. Body cameras provide evidence that exonerates officers who act properly. His voice grew stronger. The real danger to police work is the erosion of community trust. When people fear those sworn to protect them, when they see no justice for misconduct, cooperation disappears. Witnesses don't come forward. Crimes go unreported. Everyone becomes less safe, citizens and officers alike. As Powell returned to his seat, the room erupted in applause. Jasmine caught his eye and nodded her thanks. His testimony had cost him. Already other officers were avoiding him, and his captain had suggested he reconsider his future with the department. But his words carried weight that hers couldn't. After the forum ended, Councilwoman Diaz approached Jasmine. "This was eye-opening," she admitted. "I'd like to work with your coalition on drafting an actual ordinance based on these proposals. It won't be easy to pass, but it's worth trying." It was the first concrete step toward real change, and Jasmine felt a surge of hope as she shook the councilwoman's hand. That hope was tested the very next day. As Jasmine was setting up her classroom before school, Principal Chen rushed in, her face tense. "There's a situation," she said, keeping her voice low. "Officer Dawson's wife is a news producer at Channel 5. They ran a segment this morning questioning your political agenda and suggesting you're using what happened to advance a radical anti-police platform." Jasmine's hands stilled over the math worksheets she'd been organizing. "That's ridiculous." I know," Principal Chen interrupted. "But they dug into your social media, found posts from college where you attended protests against police brutality. They're painting you as someone with a pre-existing bias who's exploiting an unfortunate misunderstanding." Jasmine sat down, suddenly dizzy. "They're trying to discredit me." "Yes," Chen agreed grimly. "And it gets worse. They've been interviewing parents from the school. Most refused to comment, but they found a few willing to express concerns about your focus being diverted from teaching." The attack was cleverly constructed. Not overtly racist, nothing that could be easily dismissed. Instead, it raised questions about her motives, her professionalism, her objectivity. It was designed to isolate her, to make potential allies hesitate. That afternoon, as students filed out, Jasmine found herself looking at each parent with new wariness. Which ones had spoken against her? Which ones believed the smears? Her phone buzzed with a text from Antonio. "Don't watch the news. Don't respond. We'll address this strategically." But the damage was spreading. By evening, social media was filled with debate about her character and intentions. Some of the most vicious attacks came from anonymous accounts, using language that made it clear this was about race, not policy. Jasmine barely slept that night. When she did, she dreamed of standing in front of a classroom where all the students wore police uniforms, staring at her in silent judgment. The next morning brought unexpected support. As she walked toward the school entrance, she saw a group of parents and students gathered on the sidewalk. They held handmade signs, "We stand with Miss Turner," and "Justice for all," and "Teachers against racism." Zoe, her student, broke away from the group and ran to Jasmine, handing her a card signed by every child in her class. "We made this for you," she said proudly. "Mom says you're being brave, and that's what you always teach us to be." Tears pricked Jasmine's eyes as she accepted the card. "Thank you, Zoe." Inside, Principal Chen waited with news. The superintendent called. "The school board received over 200 emails overnight supporting you. Only 12 expressed concerns. They're backing off the idea of a leave of absence." It was a small victory, but a meaningful one. The attempt to isolate her had backfired, bringing more supporters into the open. That evening, the Justice Now coalition gathered in Antonio's office to strategize. The room was somber. Everyone had seen the news segment and the social media attacks. "They're trying to make this about you personally," Miguel observed, "because they can't argue with our evidence or our proposals." Lucia nodded. "Classic tactic. Discredit the messenger when you can't discredit the message." "So what do we do?" Jasmine asked. "I feel like I'm becoming a distraction from the real issues." Antonio leaned forward. That's exactly what they want you to think. But there's a different approach we can take. His plan was simple but powerful. Expand the voices. Instead of Jasmine being the primary spokesperson, everyone in the coalition would share the role. Each press release, interview, and public appearance would feature different people sharing their experiences. They can try to discredit one person, Antonio explained. It's much harder to dismiss dozens of voices all saying the same thing. The strategy worked better than they could have hoped. Over the next 2 weeks, coalition members appeared on local news programs, spoke at community meetings, and met with business leaders. The focus shifted from Jasmine's character to the documented pattern of misconduct and the proposed solutions. Sergeant Powell's testimony inspired 5 other officers to come forward, describing a departmental culture that protected those who violated policies and pressured others to stay silent. 2 were veteran officers nearing retirement who felt they had less to lose. Their statements carried particular weight. The tide began to turn. Councilwoman Diaz, true to her word, introduced an ordinance incorporating many of the coalition's proposals. 3 other council members signed on as co-sponsors, giving it a majority before the vote was even held. Chief Bennett, sensing the shifting political winds, announced the department would implement several reforms immediately, including a review of all complaints against officers over the past 5 years by an independent panel. Most significantly, Officer Dawson was placed on unpaid leave pending investigation, and Officer Reynolds was reassigned to administrative duties. It wasn't the full accountability the coalition sought, but it was a start. 1 month after the community forum, Jasmine stood in the back of the city council chambers as members voted on the justice and transparency in policing ordinance. It passed 7-2, a margin that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. As people celebrated around her, Jasmine felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride in what they had accomplished, exhaustion from the battles they had fought, and a growing awareness that this was just the beginning. Later that night, as the coalition gathered to celebrate, Tina raised her glass in a toast. To Jasmine, who turned her pain into purpose and showed us all how to find our voices. Jasmine shook her head. No, to all of us. What we've accomplished wasn't about one person or one incident. It was about a community finally being heard. As she looked around at the faces of people who had become not just allies but friends, Jasmine realized something important. The movement they had built together was stronger than any individual. It would continue to grow and evolve, addressing new challenges and pushing for deeper changes. For the first time since those police lights had flashed in her rearview mirror, Jasmine felt not just hope but certainty. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but they wouldn't be walking it alone, and that made all the difference. 3 years had passed since the night Jasmine was wrongfully detained. As she stood at the podium in the state capitol building, watching the governor sign the Turner Accountability Act into law, she could hardly believe the journey that had brought her to this moment. This legislation represents the most comprehensive police reform our state has ever seen, the governor announced to the crowded room. Mandatory body cameras, civilian oversight with real authority, transparent disciplinary procedures, and improved training requirements. These changes will make both our communities and our officers safer. The governor handed Jasmine the ceremonial pen used to sign the bill. None of this would have happened without your courage and persistence, Ms. Turner. Jasmine accepted the pen with a smile, but quickly directed attention to the coalition members standing behind her. The credit belongs to everyone who shared their stories and worked tirelessly for change. This was never about one person. It was about creating a system that works fairly for everyone. Later, as photographers captured images of the coalition celebrating, Lucia whispered, "Did you ever imagine we'd get this far?" Jasmine shook her head. Never. Not in my wildest dreams. From the local ordinance passed 3 years ago to this statewide legislation, the path had been neither straight nor easy. For every victory, there had been setbacks. For every ally who joined their cause, there had been powerful interests fighting to maintain the status quo. The Justice Now coalition had grown from a handful of people in Antonio's office to a respected organization with chapters in 12 cities across the state. Their website, which began with Jasmine's story and a few others, now documented hundreds of cases and tracked the implementation of reforms. But the most meaningful changes weren't captured in legislation or statistics. They lived in the stories Jasmine heard every day from people in the community. After the ceremony, a young man approached her. "Ms. Turner? I don't know if you remember me. I'm Officer Rivera. I joined the force 2 years ago." Jasmine studied his face. "You were in my 3rd grade class, weren't you?" "About 12 years ago?" He grinned. "You remember? I was the kid who was always getting into trouble." "You were the kid who always stood up for others," Jasmine corrected him gently, "even when it got you into trouble." Officer Rivera nodded. "That's why I wanted to be a police officer, and why I wanted to thank you today. The new training program we have because of your work, it's making a real difference. We're taught to build relationships in the community, not just enforce laws, to see people as people, not potential threats." His words touched Jasmine deeply. This was the true measure of their success, not just changing policies, but changing mindsets. As the crowd dispersed, Jasmine checked her watch. She needed to get back to Westridge Elementary. Her students would be waiting for their afternoon science lesson. Yes, she was still teaching. Despite invitations to work full-time in advocacy or politics, Jasmine had kept her classroom. She had reduced her hours to part-time to accommodate her role as executive director of the Justice Now Coalition, but she couldn't imagine giving up teaching entirely. "My students remind me every day why this work matters," she often explained when people asked why she didn't leave teaching behind. "They're the future we're trying to build." Driving back to Westridge, Jasmine reflected on how much had changed and how much hadn't since that night 3 years ago. Officer Dawson had eventually been fired after the independent review uncovered a pattern of misconduct far more extensive than initially known. Officer Reynolds had resigned rather than face disciplinary proceedings. Sergeant Powell had been promoted to lieutenant and now headed the department's newly formed Community Relations Division. The police chief had retired, replaced by a woman committed to reforming the department's culture from within. Body cameras were now standard equipment, and complaints against officers had decreased by 40% in the past 2 years. But despite these improvements, incidents still occurred. Just last month, the coalition had supported a family whose teenage son was roughly handled during a traffic stop. The difference now was that such incidents were taken seriously. The officers involved were immediately placed on leave. The body camera footage was released within 48 hours, and a thorough investigation was conducted. It wasn't a perfect system, no human system ever could be, but it was markedly better than before. As Jasmine parked in the school lot, she noticed Principal Chen waiting for her by the entrance. "How was the signing ceremony?" Chen asked, falling into step beside her. "Surreal," Jasmine admitted. 3 years ago, I was just trying to get 2 officers held accountable. Now we've changed the law for the entire state," Chen nodded. The students watched the live stream. "They had about 1 million questions for you," Jasmine laughed. "I bet they did." "Oh, and the superintendent called. Again. The district wants to create a civics curriculum based on your work. They're calling it From Incident to Impact: How Citizens Create Change." It was another unexpected development in a journey full of them. Jasmine had long since stopped being surprised by how far the ripples from that night had spread. In her classroom, her students greeted her with excited chatter and handmade congratulatory cards. Jasmine thanked them with genuine emotion, then gently steered them back to their science lesson. Even on historic days, photosynthesis still needed to be taught. That evening, the coalition held a small celebration at Lucia and Miguel's home. Unlike the formal event at the Capitol, this gathering was intimate. Just the original members who had been there from the beginning, plus a few who had joined along the way. As they shared food and stories, Jasmine found herself sitting next to Lieutenant Powell on the porch swing. "I've been meaning to ask you something," she said. "That night when you arrived and ordered the officers to uncuff me, what made you step in? You didn't know me. You had no reason to question your fellow officers." Powell was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I'd like to say I was being heroic, but the truth is simpler. I saw the school materials scattered on the ground. I saw how they were treating you, and something just didn't add up." He looked out at the gathering where coalition members were laughing over some shared joke. "But I think the real question is what made you step up afterward. You could have filed a complaint, maybe even sued, and then moved on with your life. Instead, you built all this." Jasmine followed his gaze. "I couldn't go back to just my classroom after seeing how broken the system was. Not when I realized I could help fix it." Inside, someone called for a toast. They rejoined the group as Antonio raised his glass. To the Turner Accountability Act, he said, and to proving that change is possible even when it seems impossible. Later that night, as the gathering wound down, Tina pulled Jasmine aside. "Have you seen this?" she asked, showing Jasmine her phone. It was an email from a coalition member in a neighboring state. "We're using your legislation as a model for our proposed bill. Any chance you could come speak at our kickoff event next month?" Jasmine smiled. "Tell them I'll be there." The work was far from over. Other communities, other states were just beginning their own journeys toward police reform. The coalition's model, centered on personal stories, concrete policy proposals, and community engagement, was being adopted across the country. When Jasmine finally arrived home, she found a package waiting on her doorstep. Inside was a framed photograph and a note. The picture showed a young woman in a police cadet uniform, smiling proudly. The note read, "Ms. Turner, you won't remember me, but 5 years ago I was terrified of police after my brother was wrongfully arrested. Your work showed me that change is possible from inside the system too. I graduate from the police academy next month and hope to embody the reforms you fought for. Thank you for your courage." Jasmine placed the frame on her mantle next to other mementos from this unexpected chapter of her life. The pen from today's bill signing, a newspaper headline announcing the passage of the city ordinance, a faded thank you card from her third-grade class the day she returned to school after the incident. Each item told part of the story of how an ordinary teacher, thrust into extraordinary circumstances, had found the courage to speak truth to power and the wisdom to build a movement that could outlast any individual. As she prepared for bed, Jasmine thought about her students' questions earlier that day. One had particularly stuck with her. "Ms. Turner, are you famous now?" She had smiled at the child's innocence. "No, honey. I'm just someone who couldn't walk away from something wrong." And that, Jasmine reflected, was perhaps the most important lesson in all of this. Change didn't require fame or special abilities. It required ordinary people willing to stand firm, to speak up, to persevere. The system hadn't changed because of Jasmine Turner. It had changed because she, and then others, and then many others, had refused to accept that it couldn't. Tomorrow, Jasmine would teach her students about photosynthesis and then head to a meeting about implementing the new accountability measures. The day after, she would help a coalition chapter in another city organize their first community forum. The work continued, as it always would. Systems built over decades couldn't be fixed overnight. Old habits and prejudices didn't disappear with the stroke of a pen, even the governor's. But as Jasmine drifted off to sleep, she felt a deep sense of peace. The path forward was clearer now, illuminated by the courage of hundreds who had raised their voices alongside hers. What had begun with blue lights in a rearview mirror had become something none of them could have imagined. A movement that was changing not just policies and practices, but hearts and minds. And in the end, that was the most powerful change of all.